Good morning, everyone. This recording is for those people who missed my presentation at the Garden Club last week, and for those of you who couldn't really see the slides as the room we had wasn't great. So I said I would record it. So here we have the results of my study tour to Britain and Europe, looking at what are the latest garden trends over there. So as you can see, my itinerary was quite extensive. I started in my hometown or home county of Cheshire, where I whakapapa to Sandbach, and then popped down to the highlight for me, which was Chelsea Flower Show. Then took a trip on the Rhine through the Netherlands, through Amsterdam, Germany, France, Colmar and Strasbourg, really taking in the medieval towns there of France and Germany. Then coming back to Cornwall, a big highlight for me was the Lost Gardens of Halligan, which I've been meaning to go to for years, and we took in the National Trust Garden of Lanhydrock there and one or two others. I joined the garden designers symposium for 2 days, and that was a national symposium to look at garden trends, and that was held at RHS Wisley, which is an amazing garden. And then popped down to Devon. Devon is full of beautiful gardens, and I just highlighted 3 of the those that I visited here, which is RHS Rosemore, Powderham Castle and the National Trust Knightshay. And then back up to Manchester for two plus gardens, a couple there I've highlighted, Trentham Gardens, and the big highlight for me was the brand new garden RHS Bridgewater, which is the first and most expensive garden to be built in it for RHS in a number of years at $35 million. Okay, so starting with Cheshire, so homecoming. So my hometown, Cheshire, Sandbach, is a market town. It's a beautiful town with a lot of history there. You can see that's my mum, her partner Mike, and myself outside our local pub, which is a Grade 1 listed building called the Old Hall. And in Sandbach is a market square with a couple of Saxon crosses. Very historical place. What hit me as soon as I arrived, and I haven't been back to England in 15 years, in May, is that, and it's the equivalent of November here in New Zealand, it's spring, is the No Mow May was really in full swing. Everybody had got the message to allow the wildflowers to grow and set flower and seed in the month of May. And the reason for that is, as some of you may know, we've suffered catastrophic losses of our insects with for various reasons, which I won't go into here, but agricultural herbicides, pesticides, and so people are becoming very aware of the need to dramatically provide increased habitat and food for our insects. And as you can see, it gives a beautiful effect. Our local churchyard here, you can see with the buttercups, the daisies, anything umbrelliferous will also provide beautiful food for insects. The local park. And another trend is edibles everywhere. So you can see here is a planter providing herbs for people, and I enjoyed picking a few for our dinner, and they're sort of springing up everywhere, and are also encouraging people to plant as well and come together as a community to garden. And not just eating, but also getting in touch, as you can see with this sensory garden in the park, touching, feeling, tasting, smelling, encouraging people to really get in touch with nature. Cottage gardens, a real revival here of planting food and edibles and recognizing that flowers are a fantastic companion for edible foods as well. Also, you can see the greengrocer's van in the background there, a recognition that it's a wonderful experience to go to a local grocer's. I grew up with that. This is a new one that has come back to Sandbach, and meeting the people that have either grown your food or have bought directly from the people that have grown your food, and it's a much more enjoyable experience, maybe having a coffee while you're buying than going to the local supermarket. More edibles. And the wildlife was in full throttle. This is a view out of my bedroom window, and you can see the local wood pigeon, the equivalent of our caribou, a little bit smaller, but she's having a sunbathe in the Clematis montana there on the garage roof. Lots of bug hotels, and they really are art as well, but very important for giving overwintering areas for our particularly solitary bees, but all sorts of insects. In recent years we've become obsessed with tidying and using leaf blowers, and again all of that is helping to reduce the amount of biodiversity we have. So putting back habitats, being a little bit less tidy but in an artistic way, is helping to increase that all important biodiversity. And another one in a park in London, and you can see again the No Mow May in full swing. And that brings me to arriving in London for the excitement of Chelsea Flower Show, and our tickets have rolled over for 2 years here since 2020, when the flower show was cancelled due to COVID, and so we were all very excited. There was a tremendous buzz arriving at the show, and I was particularly looking at, well, what are the trends this year? What can I learn, particularly for the gardens that I design? And I was utterly thrilled to see that all of the themes which are very prevalent for me, which is rewilding, getting back to nature, growing soil, growing Kai food, gardening for mental health, bringing amazing amounts of biodiversity and beauty into small spaces, and gardening sustainably, regenerating spaces. All of those themes were loud and proud at Chelsea this year, and it really was a celebration of the well-being for all life, not just humanity. So as you can see in this small space garden, quite a lot of the lawn here has been given over to beautiful wildflowers. Now I've been experimenting with wildflowers on my berm. A lot of them are not native to New Zealand, of course, so it's not as native as it would be in the UK, but it's not easy. But here they've created a beautiful display, and you can see they've just made a strip. The green roof, or roofs, you can see different effects that you can achieve here with sedum and here with wildflowers, and lots of different ideas for rewilding. This is the Blue Peter garden, which was really focusing on introducing children to getting back to the soil, getting dirt under the fingernails, and it's one of the thoughts these days is that children's immune systems are suffering because we're too clean. We're constantly killing bugs in our house with disinfectants, and we're not allowing ourselves to meet bugs really early on in the soil, which improves our immune system. But also what has been proven scientifically is there are enzymes in the soil that give us hits of serotonin and oxytocin, which make us feel good. So it's great for kids to get back into soil and to really understand that soil is a living organism. It is full of biodiversity. and it was a beautiful garden with a green roof. Here is one of my favourites, which is a small space garden, and this is the Tree of Life. You can just about see the people looking through the other side. It's a hole in the area. The whole garden was made to look like a tree trunk, and you were sitting inside the hollow of a tree trunk with a glass roof with water falling on the roof. So it's a very tranquil, beautiful experience, and you can see the planting around is very much woodland planting. This sort of planting thrives in shade, semi-shade and damp environments with the foxgloves, etc. This garden intrigued me. It is a garden which is making us aware of what happens when you regenerate, or a landscape is allowed to regenerate from fire. And as you may know, a lot of plants require fire to actually germinate. And you can see from the left hand side here where a fire has occurred and the landscape is completely burnt out, and you might think, well, that's a total devastation, but left alone it's starting to come back. And here on the right is a complete regeneration once time has been allowed to happen. And so it's quite a fascinating insight into regeneration. And other little small space ideas, I'm certainly going to give this a try. It's a great habitat for insects, and it looks beautiful. Boardwalks, lots of gorgeous planting. My favourite garden, the William Morris garden, was celebrating the work of William Morris, which is beautiful wallpaper. I've got it all over my house. My husband's obsessed. It celebrated nature and still does. And this is the famous willow pattern turned into a pergola, a shelter. And you can see the willow on the right here. The planting was very delicate, very beautiful, all picking up the colours, the delicate silvery blues and pale pinks and pastels of the William Morris wallpapers and designs, and absolutely gorgeous, this translation of the wallpaper into a water feature, and the water trickled gently down. I also loved the fact that the walls were not built with cement. So they were using, just placing there like dry stone walls, and again creating lots of habitat for insects and porosity, and gorgeous. This is my favourite type of planting. I love the copper there, picking up the copper of the water feature. This garden, at first glance, I thought was about bees, but actually this echoes a fungus, and you can see the little mushroom seat there. And the garden is celebrating our growing knowledge of the role that fungi have in our soils and our forests and our landscapes, and the recognition that fungi are the mycelium in particular, are the wood wide web, the network that trees and other plants use to communicate with each other. And this world that is opening up to our knowledge now of how plants communicate with each other is absolutely fascinating. And in particular as well, how there is a symbiotic relationship between fungi and plants, where fungi break down and make accessible to plants the minerals from the soil, which are essential for many photosynthesizing plants. And in return, the quid pro quo is that plants provide the fungi sugars, because plants can photosynthesize with their green chlorophyll, fungi cannot. And so this relationship is very, very important. And this garden was celebrating and making us all aware of that. This garden was celebrating again and making us aware of the need to give children more of a nature-based childhood. I was very lucky, and I grew up next to a lake and a field, and spent hourless, endless days making dens and foraging and picking, and getting into trouble for scrumping pears and picking wild flowers, and selling them to neighbours, and all sorts of things. So we've become a little bit risk averse around our children, and maybe they don't have the spaces anymore. So this garden was full of foraging for children, the central feature there was, I'm not sure how successful it was. I think the material was a little bit thick, but it was meant to represent a picnic blanket, and all the plants planted in it are herbs and edibles. But it really was quite beautiful. And here in New Zealand, hawthorn is a weed, but in its native England, particularly in May, it is the most beautiful plant, because the smell and the flowers are amazing, and of course it provides a lot of food in the winter for birds with its beautiful red berries. And I wonder how many of you know what plants are in this gorgeous little area here. You can see with the close, neat mown grass and the mulched soil. And what we have here is a great pile of weeds, and you might recognise the one at the front, which is plantain. And a lot of you may be tutting at this plant, moving in your borders and pulling it out, but you may not know that it has a very wide set of medicinal uses. You can chew plantain and it will help you with toothache. You can apply it to insect bites or any wounds, and it acts as a natural antiseptic. And so do a lot of the weeds in here, the plants. And it's something that I'm experimenting with in my berm. I'm fascinated by plants that are weeds because they grow really well. And I don't know how many of you, like me, I love geranium, but they don't like my garden, and I constantly am buying them and putting them in, and then they fail. Why don't we all look at creating a beautiful garden like this with plants that love living in the space that they're in, and therefore very low work, very high biodiversity, and, as you can see, very beautiful. Another view of the wild. Now, this garden here was, as you can see, all the firemen. It was really making us aware of what our built environment is, the effect that we're having on flooding. And because we are often creating paved areas and a lot of roof space, we're really opening ourselves up to flooding events. And so the exhibit showed two contrasting spaces, both of which are same size, front gardens, one of which here is flood prone, all hard spaces, and one of which here is still allowing a car parking space, but everything is porous, so that the water can get away down into the soil, into the water table, and that is really, really important for also maintaining the water cycle of going down into our water table, being evaporated through trees, and coming out through rain and then into our rivers. So I know which one I would prefer, and the Billy bonus is, in this garden there are also edibles, and biodiversity is thriving through lots of pollinating plants as well. Pardon me. This garden was very, very beautiful. It's a very romantic garden, and it was tipped to be best in show, but it didn't actually win a gold, and that's quite fascinating to me. That I think the judges didn't think that it made a statement about anything particularly different. It was a very beautiful garden, but not adding anything in particular to our art of gardening. However, it did win the People's Choice Award, and I think for me, I think my favourite things in this garden were the no-mow lawn, and here the hawthorn is actually horizontally pleached, and it just shows, you can't quite see, but the top of the, oh, here you can see the one at the back. So they're horizontally pleached into a flat shape, and who would have thought you could have done that with common old hawthorn? So it's a native tree to Britain, but it's been trained to look beautiful. And all the planting here, I've been learning about moon gardening, and all the planting here would be an amazing moon garden plant, which is when you go out into the garden and by the light of the moon, the plants glow. And not just important for our aesthetics, but plants that glow and give off a beautiful scent at night are very, very important for moths. And again, due to often something that people are not aware of, but light pollution, we've and also general pollution, we've lost a lot of our night flying moths, which are also food for bats, which we have in New Zealand, and lots of other night creatures. Here's a fantastic young man who's a footballer, and he shows how you can go from being a footballer to a gardener in just a very short space of time. Within a year or two, you can have a garden at Chelsea. And really picking up on the theme of mental health, Tayshan's garden was all about recognising mental health and regeneration, and the importance of celebrating mangroves and the ecosystem work that mangroves do, and how they regenerate land, to how we regenerate people through a garden. And it was truly amazing for a first-time gardener to show what can be done. This was my purchase, which I didn't manage to get back into my suitcase. I just went a bit mad, I think. I just thought it was rather gorgeous pea stand. So it's sitting in my mum's garage, waiting for me to figure out how to get it back here. It was a bit too long to go in the suitcase. Now the highlight, this garden won gold and best in show. And you may be looking at it and, like Monty Don, asking yourself, well, is this really a garden? And the garden was brought to Chelsea by Rewilding Britain, something I'm a member of. And it is celebrating beavers and the work that they do in our ecosystem. And you can see here there's a mocked up beaver dam and a hide, so you can sit and watch. And the garden is really echoing a wild space which has been allowed to go back to nature, and the stream here, and you can see the sort of quite a muddy stream at the top which the dam is cleaning, and then it comes out crystal clear at the bottom. And I was lucky enough to go to Scotland and meet beavers in the wild and see the work that they're doing. And when you actually see it, it is a little bit shocking, because you see trees that are gnawed and fallen, and to our human eyes it's quite messy. But what we know is that those trees will regenerate. The beavers effectively coppice them, so we get an abundance then of fresh new wood. And the beavers are creating new habitat for lots and lots of other creatures, and they are slowing the water down. So beavers in the landscape are known to reduce flooding, and they don't stay in the same place. So in a few years they'll move on. So they do their ecosystem work and then they move on. So there's a big move now. There are beavers in various places in Devon, in Scotland, as I say, and they're becoming very, very popular to allow them to re-establish. And you may or may not know, but beavers did actually become extinct in Britain. They were native, but now they've making a resurgence. And so this garden really is celebrating that return to wildness that we need right now for our biodiversity. And some people think that maybe the trend has gone too far that way. And I think one of the things I noticed at Chelsea was there wasn't very much emphasis on growing food. It was really all rewilding, but two things can sit very well hand in hand. One of my favourite types of garden is a food forest, which is full of biodiversity, abundance for humans and for all life. So in conclusion, at the end of part one of my talk, really I loved the rewilding in Britain. I loved Chelsea Flower Show, and I've got lots of ideas to bring back here into my gardens in New Zealand. And so hopefully you'll join me for part two.